So welcome to our accounts receivable practice questions. So ganito ang magiging mechanics ng ating practice questions na ito. If-flash ko po ang questions sa screen mo, gaya nito. Tapos, ipo-pause mo yung screen. Pag na-solve mo na ang problem, then play it again for the next questions. Sa solutions naman, ganito ang gagawin natin. So yan ang beginning balance natin ng the allowance for doubtful accounts. Tapos, ang sabi ng problem natin is, during the year, the accounts receivable of 35,000 were written off. So, ano ang effect ng write-off? So, isusulat ko lahat ng mga concepts na kakailanganin natin para ma-analyze natin yung question for each questions. Then, isusulat natin dito yung mga solutions. Halika, samahan mo akong mag-analyze ng accounts receivable practice questions. Alright, question number 3. The requirement on question number 3 is the amount collected from the customers on accounts receivable during year 2 was, so ang hinahanap ng problem ay kung magkano ang collections ng company sa buong taon. Para makuha natin ang accounts receivable ending, so ang mga transactions that affects our accounts receivable are credit sales. From our accounts receivable beginning, ina-add po natin ang credit sales, yung mga sales natin on account. Then, kapag nag-return ang mga customers, mina-minus po natin yan sa ating accounts receivable. Our entry for the sales return is debit to sales returns and credit to accounts receivable. Mina-minus din natin yung write-off. Ano bang entry natin sa write-off? At bakit minus siya sa ating accounts receivable? Our entry for the write-off is debit to allowance for doubtful accounts and credit to accounts receivable. Alright? So, credit to accounts receivable, ang ibig sabihin, mina-minus natin yan sa accounts receivable. Then, of course, kapag nakakolekta na tayo, kina-cancel din natin, inaalis din natin yan sa ating accounts receivable. Okay? Then, we will end up with our accounts receivable ending. Alright? Kung mas sanay ka sa T account, then kunin mo sa T account. William Company had an accounts receivable balance of 225,000 on December 31st or year 1. So, ano itong 225,000? Yan po yung ending balance last year. Alright? Na magiging beginning balance ng year 2. So, ang hinahanap ng problem, yung collections for year 2. This 225,000, yan po ang magiging beginning balance natin na accounts receivable. Diyan po tayo mag-uumpisa ng ating solutions. And 150,000 on December 31st, year 2. So, dito sa problem, binigay na sa'yo agad ang ending balance ng iyong accounts receivable ending. The company wrote off 50,000 of accounts receivable during year 2. So, anong effect ng ating write-off? Minus siya. So, we will minus this write-off to the beginning balance of 50,000. Then, sales for the year 2 totaled 600,000 and 75% of sales were on account. So, anong ibig sabihin? Ang buong sales ng company, William Company, ay 600,000. And this 600,000 is composed of the cash sales at saka yung sales on account or yung credit sales. Ang sabi ng problem, 75% of this sales were on account. So, ang credit sales natin ay 75% of the 600,000. Yan ang accounts receivable natin. So, our credit sales, so meron tayong credit sales na 450,000, which is addition to your accounts receivable beginning. Kasi ang entry natin dito is debit to accounts receivable and credit to sales. Now, ang hinahanap ng problem ay hindi yung ending balance, kundi yung collection ng company. Okay, remember, our collections is minused on our accounts receivable. Entry natin sa collections is debit to cash and credit to accounts receivable. So, that's why it's minus. So, ito, ang hinahanap natin. So, ipa-plug in mo lang ito kung magkano yung missing amount. And the missing amount is 475,000. And so, our answer is letter A. Alright, question number 4 tayo. The requirement is how much should Fairway report as bad debts expense on its year 5 income statement? Alright, so ang tinatanong dito is yung bad debts expense. Bad debts expense is also known as doubtful account expense and also known as uncollectible account expense. Alright? Pare-parehas lang ang ibig sabihin nun. Ito pong makukuha nating amount by using the aging of accounts receivable at percentage of accounts receivable. Itong amount na ito, this is actually your desired ending balance of your allowance for doubtful accounts. Alright? Ito po yung dapat na magiging ending balance ng ating allowance for doubtful accounts. Alright? Pero kung ang gagamitin natin is percentage of the credit sales, yung amount na makukuha mo dito sa pag-calculate, ito na po yung bad debts expense natin. On its December 31st year 4 balance sheet, Fairway Company reported accounts receivable of $850,000, net of an allowance for doubtful accounts of $45,000. On December 31st year 5, Fairway's company's balance sheet shows gross accounts receivable of $922,000 and Fairway's income statement reported sales of $3 million. Alright, during the year, accounts receivable of $35,000 were written off and $18,000 were recovered. Based on past experience, 5% of Fairway's ending accounts receivable are uncollectible. So, anong ginagamit ni Fairway Company? Ang ginagamit niya method is the percentage of accounts receivable. So remember, kapag ito ang gagamitin natin, yung amount na makukuha natin, yan ang desired ending balance natin. To solve these problems, we are going to start with the beginning balance of our allowance for doubtful accounts. Alright? Amounting to 45,000, alright? Nandyan sa net of allowance for doubtful accounts of 45,000. So, during the year, accounts receivable of 35,000 were written off. So, yung write-off, ima-minus natin yan sa ating allowance for doubtful accounts. Ano bang entry natin sa write-off? We debit allowance for doubtful accounts and we credit the accounts receivable. Alright? So, dito sa allowance for doubtful account natin ay minus ang write-off. And 18,000 were recovered. So, itong recovery natin ay nasa credit side. That means we are going to add this recovery to the allowance for doubtful accounts. Ano bang entry natin sa recovery? Our entry will be debit to accounts receivable and credit to allowance for doubtful accounts. Alright? Then, yung collections mo from that recovery is a debit to cash and credit to the accounts receivable. Alright? So, nag-credit tayo ng allowance for doubtful accounts from that entry. So, yung recovery is addition to our allowance for doubtful accounts. Alright? Amounting to 18,000. Before we plug in our bad debts expense, ang balance natin before our bad debts expense is 28,000. This is your balance before bad debts expense. Ang sabi ng problem, ang ginagamit ng company is 5% of the ending accounts receivable. And how much is our accounts receivable? Our accounts receivable is 922,000. So, we add our bad debts expense. So, hindi pa natin alam kung magkano ang bad debts expense natin. Pero, malalaman natin by calculating our desired ending balance of our allowance for doubtful account. So, ito po yung allowance based on our percentage of the accounts receivable of 922,000. So based on our percentage of the accounts receivable, this is our ending balance of our allowance for doubtful accounts, which is 46,100. So ipa-plug in lang po natin ang ating bad debts expense. Alright? And our plug-in is 18,100. So our answer is 18,100. Yan po ang bad debts expense natin. So our answer is letter A.